Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you, featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today, I say I'm honored because I've spoken to this Bernadette Boas, and she is funny. So let me tell you what she's about. First of all, she's an acclaimed speaker, a mindset coach, and the author of popular business and personal development books called The Shedding the Corporate Bitch, Shifting from Bitch to Rich in Life and Business. Now, I want to tell you something else about her. With a pink slip in her hand and the words, "You're fired," echoing in her ear, Bernadette Boas went on a journey and discovered what it took to discover, confront, and shed her bitches of fear, insecurity, and low self-esteem to create and accelerate the riches she possesses today in her business and her life. She will share her 5 steps shift to riches formula so listeners can consider what bitches they need to shed to finally create the riches they deserve in life. Let's talk to Bernadette Boas now. So Bernadette, I mean, that is a very important thing that you received this pink slip and you didn't give up. Now,
right.
So tell me about that.
Well, of course it came out of left field. I will say, as many people experience, that, you show up for work 1 minute and the next minute you're standing in the middle of the parking lot.
Yeah.
And at first it's kind of pain and it's hurt and it's shock and dismay, but then it turns into, or at least for me, it turned into realization that I wasn't as happy as I thought I was. I wasn't really wanting all the trappings that I experienced and that I possessed. And all of a sudden, I was given an opportunity to say, well, I can either be bitter and angry and revengeful on what just happened, or I can use it as an opportunity to really understand what is it that I really want out of what I say, the one life that I have that goes really, really fast. Yeah. And that's what I did. I took advantage of really just leveraging the opportunity to kind of dig deep.
So what happened at that moment was that you looked at your glass and you said, my glass is half full. I don't want to be in a position where I just get depressed and despondent all about because some quote-unquote stupid company decided to let me go. Now, my audience, they want to know, how do you develop that attitude? Did you always have an attitude like that? And who was the person or the persons who actually gave you the inspiration to stay very, very secure and very positive? Who was it?
Well, I will say that it was something that I did possess probably up until my early 20s. My parents, I'm one of 12 children, to parents that, prior to both of them passing up until a few years ago, were married for over 50 years. And they really taught each and every one of us that we can be anything that we want to be. We can be anyone that we want to be. And I just did have this very positive, sassy, optimistic view of the world. And yet, for a good number of years, I just lost focus on that. And I went more toward, wanting the power, position, and prosperity, all the greedy things that life does, put out there, and I definitely bought in on it. Yeah. And so when I, got that pink slip and I found that opportunity to really dig deep and figure out what it is I really wanted, I really learned that putting junk out in the world and lashing out in the world was really lashing out on myself, and that's where the whole idea of bitches came from, is I realized it wasn't a personality of someone else. It was actually a state of mind of myself within, which were the bitches that were causing me and anyone else to lash out. Yeah. So as I began to discover and confront those things, I really started saying, Okay, it's a choice, right, Susan? We have choices in this world. Do you want to wake up miserable and go out in the world miserable and then receive miserable, or do you want to get up and, even if you're not in the best state of mind, shift yourself to a state of, positivity and productivity, and therefore receive that as well? And I wanted the latter. I just wanted to feel happy. I want to carry around this angst that I carried around for so long that caused that bitch within me.
Okay, let's first of all, let's define the word bitch, because it's a real funny word to use for a book and for several other reasons. But define it for me. In
my world, like I said, it did start off with, however, how most people think about it, as a term to use to label someone who is nasty or is a bully in some way, shape, or form. What I learned in my shedding process in writing the book is I set out to write about that person, and yet it was me, and I was discovering that it had nothing to do with a personality trait. It had to do with the person's mindset, the insecurities, the fears, the intimidations, the low self-esteem, not feeling good enough, not feeling deserving enough. And it was those things, those limiting beliefs, those inner demons that really were the reason that, and the reason why many people lash out on, the world and themselves. So I realized that word, bitch, was really that junk, those inner demons. And so in my world, when, I see someone lashing out and see someone kind of being cruel or just even, beating up on themselves, I kind of look at it and say, I'm sorry that you're dealing with those bitches of fear, insecurity, doubts, and negativities.
Right.
And, let me help you if I can.
Yeah. So you've written this book, and it talks a little bit about, not a little bit, but it talks a lot about shifting from pain to joy, from the bitch to the rich, to be rich.
Right.
Now, again, I'm interested in understanding what that really means to people. And when you say you can tell people how to shift from pain to joy, how do you do that?
Well, I do it by having them recognize it. So that brings the first part of my Shift to Riches formula. I realized that while I was kind of excavating my soul, I often call it, and really kind of being upfront with myself, I was starting to discover that I possess two things, and I do summarize them even as pain and joy. So I realized that, yes, I was dealing with these pains, these fears, these insecurities, and I was willing to, and I knew I had to look at them. I had to kind of say, wow, I had a pretty normal, loving life. What really provoked me kind of, feeling these pains, these sadnesses, these, angst? And I realized that there was, kind of very significant and yet also insignificant things that happened in my childhood, into my, 20s, that really were painful to me. And I allowed them to kind of define me. Mm-hmm. And yet at the same time, and I call them honoring your riches, at the same time there were a lot of joys that I possessed. There were a lot of traits and qualities and values and skills that I possessed that I absolutely loved about myself and that I knew other people loved about me. So I also work with people to really kind of discover and confront those, because, Susan, especially as women,
yes,
we don't spend a lot of time honoring ourselves.
Correct.
It's easy to beat up on ourselves. It's harder for us to go out and say, you know what, I am beautiful, I am confident, I am strong, I am bold, I am empowered. Because they also think that, well, that's boasting, that's being conceited, that's, being arrogant. And quite honestly, we have to do both. We have to look at what is it in our lives that are causing us pain and why, and that's the discovery and confronting it. But what are those things that we love about ourselves? Because it's going to be those things that are going to allow us to push through the pain. We have to hang on to those riches in order to really work through this process.
Bernadette, here's what I want to know. There are people born into circumstances that are really horrible, and then there's people who are born into circumstances that are quite wonderful. Now, the thing is, sometimes it doesn't really matter who your parents are, because let's take,
Right.
I think about Colin Powell. And, he's a man, not a woman. And, of course, different things happen to different people because of their ethnicity, their sex, their, all different reasons. Now, Colin Powell talks a lot about the fact that he was brought up by a single mother. And this single mother instilled in him and his brother, they instilled a certain ethical or moral kind of persuasion, and he felt very confident and very, shall we say, he had a lot of self-esteem, and look where he ended up. So when you meet people who you coach, and if you were to tell them at that point in their life, was it their family that caused them to feel so insecure, or was it just life, or was it the circumstances they were in, or was it because there's so much competition and so many negative things going on in the world, and it affects them, right?
Right. Well, and, I also make sure, because I've never done it, I don't necessarily put the blame on someone. It's not, because it's a circumstance. Someone can be absolutely cruel and or loving to you, and how you internalize that, how you perceive it and internalize and accept it, that's up to you. That goes back to the choices. That's up to you. Now, is it right for someone to be cruel to you or demeaning or curt? On the flip side, to be loving, blah, blah, blah. There's, you can agree or disagree with that, but it's how an individual kind of takes that in. So let me paint you a real simple example. Is being one of 12, I was the oddbird. I was the black sheep. I was the milkman's daughter, the postman's daughter. I looked very different. I spoke very different, and I acted very different than my 11 siblings. Now I'm the eighth in the order. And I believed up until I was 7 or 8, no, actually more like 8 or 9, I believed I was adopted. Because if I heard one more time, like people saying, oh, is this really your daughter or your sister or your friend who, doesn't look, act, and whatever. And I just thought that I didn't fit in. I thought, well, and my sisters and siblings used to tease me that I was adopted. Oh, she's the adopted one. So I went crying to my mother. I went crying to my mother going, am I really adopted? So and of course she said no, and I allowed that to really internalize. It was no big deal, right? The kids were just being kids and, teasing, but yet I internalized it in such a way that until I was in probably my early 40s, did I ever really fit in and think that I belonged. Not only in my family, because obviously I did, begin to look and sound and act like them, but at the same time, I even internalized that to where it affected, whether or not I felt like I fit in anywhere.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be, critical. It just can be these little ways that we internalize things and we perceive things that all of a sudden become our belief systems, which can either, propel us forward like Colin Powell, or it can wreak havoc on us,
right.
In ways that, kind of hold us back.
Yeah. All right. Now, let's talk a little bit about your book, because your book really describes a lot of different ways in which people can develop all these positive things. Now, you call it 5 Steps to Shift from the Bitch to Rich in Life. That's in your book. Okay, so give me pinpoints of the 5 steps.
So they break down. I'll give you the labels first, and then I'll break it down. So the steps are discover, confront, shed, create, and accelerate. And so if you look at the first 3, they're all around kind of really, kind of sitting still, digging deep, and assessing, or like I said, excavating your soul around who you are today, who, what you like about yourself, what you don't, and a number of other things. And I'll, briefly go through each of them. And then the last 2 are all right, now as you're beginning to shift, as you're beginning to change and become something new and different, because that's typically why people come to me, is they want something new, different, change, or shift in their life. Then they can use that knowledge that they're gaining about themselves to create and accelerate. So the discover piece is really doing that discovery of themselves, everything. I mean, I ask them, tons and tons of questions about who are they, who do they want to be, what's their backstory. Remember, I'm also a writer and a screenwriter. So what's their backstory? What brought them to this point? Discover kind of what is it that they want to achieve out of this one life that they have that goes really, really fast. And then confront all the good, bad, and indifferent. So all those, pains and all those joys, you kind of have to sit down and just confront them and allow yourself to kind of feel them, experience them, like them, dislike them, and then eventually shed them. So also not just your inner stuff. It also comes to the fact that there's people, places, and things around you that are either working for you or not working for you. They're either serving you or they're not serving you. So you have to also discover, confront, and eventually either shed those or hold on to them and leverage them to kind of allow you to move forward and create now who it is you want to be, what it is that you want, how you're going to go and do it, and so forth and so on. And then I find, and it's so exciting and exhilarating to watch it, that once people do start making changes and making shifts, no matter how big or drastic, they want more. It's kind of like, wow, I love being happy. Like you asked at the very beginning, what keeps me so positive and productive and happy? It's, gosh, every time I have a small accomplishment or I make someone feel or something, I get a great response to whatever it is I'm doing. It just makes me want that feeling again and again. It's like drugs, right?
Right. It's kind of like an addiction, right? Once you find that inner self. I mean, okay, now let's just talk about the word rich. Rich is a very broad term because some people think about it and they say, well, it's all about money. Everything's about money. And by the way, everything's about power too. So when you talk about the word bitch to rich, are you referring to getting all the positive self-esteem and confidence, or are you talking about pure money? What is it?
Yeah, no, it's definitely the former. It's definitely all about, and Susan, I should explain that I love words, terms, phrases that provoke someone to ask questions. So if someone, looks at me, and trust me, I've been slapped across the face, I've had people's backs turned to me. I've had people get up and leave, my speeches or my workshops because they're getting uncomfortable. Yeah. I'm okay with that if it causes them to start questioning. So the bitch to rich is really, if you have all of this junk within your mindset, then I want you to, work on it to where now you gain all the riches in life. And you can define them any way that you want. My definition of success or riches is going to be different than yours.
Right.
8 years ago, my definition of rich, had I asked myself that, I would have said power, position, and prosperity. That would have been my answer. Yeah. Today, it's happiness, contentment, safety, security, love, joy. It's everything but the materialistic part of the world. Yeah. So I don't want to answer that for someone because it's going to be different, but it isn't about the materialistic only. It's not about the money.
Well, what I want you to talk about again, Bernadette, is you've been involved with, probably thousands of people. Now, can you give my audience a little taste of what one of your experiences were, a story about somebody that you worked with who started out very depressed and despondent, and suddenly after working with you and reading your book, this person just absolutely changed. So can you tell us a story about that, please?
Sure. I'll be upfront and say a lot of times why people come to me, and or I've had friends and bosses come to me for them. A lot of times it's not that they're sad and depressed. A lot of times it's because either they are carrying a lot of angst that is being projected as very bullying or very bitchy, and it's not, working for them. So I had a number of them, but I had this one individual, and their boss came to me, and this was going back to like 2010, and their boss came to me and said, this person is smart and, is productive and, she's very systems driven, very process driven, and in the position that she's in, that was, exactly what they needed, but no one wants to work with her. And no one wants to, kind of follow her in any way, shape, or form. And so we can't keep people on her team. And yet I know there's a better person underneath all of that type of thing.
Right.
And so I said, well, let me, and of course you probably know a lot of bosses in the workplace don't get into, and I think she's miserable herself. They don't get into that soft mindset type of conversation.
Right.
And yet that was going to be what was needed, and that's what I made sure that, this boss understood. So I went and met this individual for our first kind of meet and greet, and I could see, because it was like a mirror of me at one point. I could see that it was all a lot of masks. It was all a lot of walls. It was all a lot of, ways that she was protecting herself in the behavior that she was having. And and I not easily, I won't say easily, but by the time of our first session, I was even able to get her to acknowledge that she was unhappy, that she wouldn't use the word miserable until like our second or third session. So, so to compress this, I'm very upfront. I often say that I'm a tough love coach because I said to her in that very first meeting, do you want to change? Do you want something different? Do you want something new? And she didn't say yes. She just simply said, I have to or I lose my job. So, again, it was very external, not internal. So I said, well, this is kind of what we need to do in order to work together. So I said, you need to be very upfront with me, and I'm going to be very, supportive, but upfront with you. So as we started getting into this, and I was expecting her to be very closed. And it's amazing when someone's thrown a life jacket that they do kind of take it and hold on to it, and they do want to be saved. So over time, and I would say I worked pretty close to a year with this individual.
Wow.
And I met her once a week, though that's not necessarily in all cases. So we met, we would meet, and the more and more I had her digging and discovering and confronting and shedding, the more open and the more engaging. But I'll tell you, Susan, the people around her noticed it within the first 6 to 8 weeks. They noticed her little shifts. She still guarded herself, and it took quite a while to let for her to completely let a lot of it go. But they were able to see that she was, and it was through, I will have them do exercises with themselves and then with other people. I'll have them just try new things even though they are not comfortable with it. I'll do a lot of hands-on practice, role-playing between my clients and myself, and a lot of my workshops and even my large speaking engagements, I do that as well. So she went from really kind of never acknowledging that it's her, that it's everybody else, to totally taking responsibility for her behavior and actions. And then eventually she did she did commit to acknowledging where in her life, her pain was coming from, and the fact that she was unhappy, and the fact that it was impacting all areas of her life.
Yeah.
And by, the end of, didn't take the whole year, and not to say I'm not even finished shedding. 7, 8 years into it, I still get those times where I just, feel insecure or feel not good enough and whatnot. And it's a natural part of life, but the tools that I gave her, she's been able to use and continue to use even to this day.
Yeah.
And, just as I have and my other clients have.
Well, nobody's perfect, Bernadette, and it's really an interesting thing when you think about the women of the past. And I'm part of a group that talks about history. It talks about various presidential wives, and one of the things that you learn from understanding history is that there are always some people out there who persevere, patient, become very smart. It wasn't easy for women 100 years ago. I mean, they didn't even have the ability to vote. However, think about some of the wives of the presidents. Think about people like Adams, people like Eleanor Roosevelt. These women, they were strong, and they were very important to the president because he took a lot of advice from them.
Absolutely.
Right. So don't you think history tells a lot about how we can become a very important person, not a person who's necessarily wealthy, but a person who's wealthy with regard to their contentment, their joy, their happiness. I'm just curious whether you think history plays a part.
Well, I absolutely think. I mean, I'll say very emphatically, history plays a part. Now, whether or not I agree that it should or not, I vacillate, back and forth on it because there's great lessons to be learned. But I'm not one to ever play a victim. I'm not one to ever hold on to stuff. I don't believe in regret. Mm-hmm. But I just learn from. I see every situation, every experience as it happening for a reason, or there's a lesson in it. And so I think there's a great deal of lessons that we can take from history. And, of course, there's a lot of reasons for why history is the way it is, just like you said. Women didn't have the right to vote. That created a lot of stuff, right? That provoked a lot of good and bad things. However, I just really tend to want to keep people in the present. I tend to want to keep my clients to acknowledge what in their past has impacted them.
Right.
And if it's history, it's history.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, I want them to process it and understand it, but then let it go because I don't believe that you should, hang on to that history because it does oftentimes create excuses and victims as a result of it. And therefore, I really work with them to kind of process it, acknowledge it, understand it, and then choose. Again, it comes back to choice. Mm-hmm. Choose how they want to then leverage it as they go forward.
Right.
Because they can either leverage it to their benefit, like, the lessons from the strong women that stood their ground and fought for blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Yet at the same time, they need to find their own voice. They need to find their own use for that information and that history.
Yeah, and before we finish, we're going to talk a little bit about your book once more and how people can find it and, all of the things that they need to know about you. But I'm interested in understanding if somebody said to you, okay, Bernadette, you're talking about all these wonderful things, and but Bernadette, who's your inspiration? Who is a person who you can use as a role model for all the women and the men who read your book and kind of come to you as a coach?
Role models. Role models. Well, one would be my mother, again, passed, but my mother just had a, gentle, graceful, but strong being. If I become, a percentage of her, I'd be very happy. Yeah. I also have my own coach and mentor who's become a very dear friend, but she too, I just admire her courageousness, her boldness, but she's also a very gentle Southern woman, and I'm one of those very, very loud northeastern women, and she's really taught me and given me, I don't even think she knows she's taught me and given me a lot of grace in my life.
Well,
so I would say those two.
Well, you're very lucky. I mean, there are a lot of people out there who don't have people who inspire them or make them feel good. And when you find those people, boy, how lucky can you get? So,
but I will comment. But I need to comment on that because again, I'm not one for excuses. There's always an opportunity for anyone to find that inspiration, and it doesn't need to be someone that they know and they can touch, but they can, find them online. They can find them through the studies. They can find them through, but they have to answer questions about, what do they consider to be things, people that inspire them. But so, I don't want to leave it at the fact that a lot of people don't have it. Anyone can have those that inspire them, and they don't need to necessarily be physically in their life.
Yeah. Well, my guest today has been Bernadette Boas. She's an acclaimed speaker, mindset coach, and the author of a popular business and personal development book called Shedding the Corporate Bitch, Shifting from Bitch to Rich in Life and Business. And I want to thank you so very much, Bernadette, for being on the Susan Brender Show. Now, if people want to get in touch with you or if they want to find your book, what do they do?
They can reach me directly. I love hearing from people at Bernadette Boas at ballofireinc.com. And they can find that email address at balloffireconsulting.com. They can find the book, obviously, on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, but at the same time, they can go to either sheddingthebitch.com or balloffireconsulting.com, and they can find the book there.
Well, again, thank you so very much, Bernadette Boas, for being on the Susan Brender Show, and I hope a lot of people have learned a lot from her. Even in this 30-minute show, there was so much information and education that Bernadette gave you an opportunity to listen to. So thanks again.
Thank you for having me, Susan. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.